I'm Tristan Waldvogel, founder of TW Search Partners. I recruit for senior communications leaders across the built environment, real estate, architecture, design, and everything in between. This podcast is about how communications actually works in this industry. It's for the people doing the work and those hiring for it. Let's get into it. Today, I'm joined by Andrew Peerless. He's the Vice President of Communications at Corcoran Sunshine, one of the most influential luxury residential development marketing firms in the country. Andrew has worked across some of New York's most high profile development projects and has spent years operating at the intersection of communications, branding, architecture, and development. Today, we're talking about what built environment communications actually looks like behind the scenes, from marketing projects before they physically exist to how the communications role inside real estate organizations continues to evolve. Andrew, thanks so much for taking the time today.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for that very nice introduction.
Absolutely. So, yeah, let's get right into it. So, you started in traditional PR, but you also have an architecture background. How much does actually understanding the language of architecture and design matter in this work? And does it change how you communicate projects to broader audiences?
Yeah, I think you can look at this from a couple of different perspectives. One, there's understanding how spaces work and the issues or the drawbacks or the challenges that might face a residential layout. So one of the things that we do as a company is that we help developers optimize their buildings to sell well, to resonate well with buyers. We have a planning and design practice that does that. Having the background helps me have those conversations with developers. But from a communication standpoint, look, I think it's always helpful to be able to speak the language of the industry that you're in, and especially the industries that are sort of around the edges of the specific industry you're in. So that could be architecture, it could be construction. But architecture specifically, we've all probably heard of ArchiSpeak, where their architects have their own way of talking about their work. And I think it's a great tool for them. It helps them to communicate the ethos of their design or their intentions in a way that resonates with other designers. But when they're talking about catenary curves or datum lines, the challenge for someone like me or the opportunity is that might not mean much to a buyer. And so one of the things that we are always thinking of is who is our end audience. So it's the top brokers who are working with very well-heeled clientele, and it's extremely successful people that are interested in luxury properties. And those are not necessarily people that are going to respond to the very kind of scholarly aspects of ArchiSpeak. Our job, and I think this is where it's helpful for me to have the background, is to understand what a datum line is and help to communicate that into language that a buyer can respond to. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's all about how we make the buyers feel. And so if the language is too cold or too clinical, can we translate that into something that feels a little warmer and a little bit fuzzier? By way of example, I worked on a tower with a very famous architect who will remain unnamed. And the architect does not typically in these arrangements get any right to name the properties. We have a whole separate discipline that works on that. But the tower had some kind of blob-like elements in it. And she felt very strongly about that aspect of it. And she was really like falling on her sword to make sure that it was called Blob Tower. And at the end of the day, it's hard to convince, might be hard to convince someone to spend $25 million on a condo in Blob Tower. But what can we say about the form that actually feels different than Blob? Does that answer your question?
It absolutely does. And it sounds like your background has really helped. And yeah, I'm not sure if blob is the way to go for naming there. A lot of people outside this industry assume luxury real estate marketing is mostly visuals and press coverage. What does the actual communications work behind these projects really look like?
The visuals are certainly important, right? Like we do a lot of work to help people to imagine a building that might not exist yet. I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later. The shiny renderings are great, and it's certainly an important part of the process. And there was a time maybe 15, 20 years ago when any major new development in New York certainly was guaranteed some level of press coverage just because it was new and the media landscape was very pro development. That started to shift about 10 years ago when you started to see a different editorial slant where there was more of a critical eye toward new development. There was some, I would say, evolution of thinking at the editorial level about who audiences were and what they wanted to see. So it became harder to place stories about new developments just based on the fact that they existed. And I think that's where a lot of the interesting communications work can come in, where it brings up questions of, all right, if the renderings and the name and the developer and the location aren't going to do it alone, what are the stories that we can unearth about this development that are actually going to make it press worthy? And so that could be a feature of the design. We have a building in our portfolio that we sold out quite a while ago where every residence had a formal entry foyer, which is unusual in New York, but it was enough of a hook that we were able to get press for it. We know that the architect and the designer, we work closely with developers to help them identify who's right for their property. Those decisions are absolutely part of the marketing story. And if it's a major designer's first building in New York, or there's some interesting feature about it that makes it specifically noteworthy to a consumer, that's always a great angle. Is it an iconic location? We are lucky enough to be working on the Flatiron building, which is about as amazing an assignment as anybody could get. And we're so honored to be able to steward it into its residential area. The agency that works on that has done an astounding job. It's just been a slow drip of great press. Not that it's easy for them because they're coming up with the right stories, placing them at the right time, and really creating a nice progression. But it's a lot easier to get press about the Flatiron building than it is about the slightly more nondescript building in an outer borough. We're always thinking about what are the stories that are going to connect with the press, and then by extension are going to connect with the brokers and the buyers that'll be the target audience.
Sure. So it sounds like the differentiation strategy is what makes or breaks a story these days.
Absolutely. And I think another key part of it is that you ask these questions early, because slapping a name or trying to slap a brand onto something that is cookie cutter or run of the mill typically is very challenging to do and doesn't yield the results that anybody's hoping for. Buildings in every market that just have some sort of a name slapped on them, called it Aria or Harmony Tower or something like that. And it doesn't mean anything. The branding exercises that we go through, it's really trying to evoke the soul of a building and connect it to the actual features, the attributes of the building that are going to help the buyers forge that connection that will lead them to buy.
That's fascinating. That's really how comms can make or break a difference here. So you've worked on projects that didn't physically exist yet. There's nothing to point to, nothing to experience. How do you get people excited about something they can't see yet?
Yeah, we are typically working on things that don't exist yet. There's a lot of debate about what the right time is to launch a building. It's not unusual to be a year or more out from the building actually being ready to occupy when we're launching sales. So there's a ton of work that goes into building up a narrative. The renderings that we talked about are certainly a big part of that. You want to give someone something visually to grab onto. The building has an iconic form, 56 Leonard, 11 Hoyt, buildings like that. We've worked on both of those. That's such a gift because a buyer will immediately latch onto something like that. But one of the most important things we do, and this is really where I see comms stretching across all of the disciplines that we have in-house, is that we create an experience center or a sales gallery. Sometimes if the building is far enough along, it might be like in an empty retail space. Sometimes it's in an office building that overlooks the development site so people can see the tower going up. Sometimes if you're maybe just off of a prime retail strip, you want it to be a retail space so that people start to make the connection. There's a lot of thinking that goes into where it is, but giving people the opportunity to touch and feel and experience an environment goes a huge way. They will almost always incorporate a kitchen mock-up, so a full build out of what a trophy kitchen might look like, a bathroom build out. If the powder room is different, we'll try to have a powder room build out as well. But you're really immersing people in the storytelling of a building. And so if there are key architectural attributes, we will try to build those directly into the space. If there's going to be a specific scent that's associated with the building, scent marketing has become a big thing, that will be in the space as well. And it really empowers the buyers to touch and feel and start to imagine themselves. There will almost always be a full, like a living room mock-up. And we think very carefully about what goes in there, who the designer is. Does it reflect the spirit of the building? And then within those spaces, you might be able to see a mock-up of what your view is. There will be some sort of a presentation board, digital, where you can look through different layouts, see what the views might be. Views are always very important to our buyers. And I fall on my sword a little bit about this. I firmly believe that every decision that we make in those types of environment are critical because they are all part of how the buyer feels when they walk out the door. I consider it one of the biggest coups I ever pulled in my career. Is we were lucky enough to work with the best developers in the industry, but we worked with Tishman Speyer on 11 Hoyt, and it was a team that was particularly open to marketing the building in the way that we needed to market it. I had an experience a couple of weeks prior where I went to a competitive building and I walked in. They offered me a cup of coffee, served it to me in a styrofoam cup with a plastic spoon and a little cup of non-dairy creamer like you would find at a diner. And wow, what can kill the mood faster than something like that? Seriously, like you're trying to get someone to part with millions and millions of dollars and you're serving them a Keurig cup of coffee in a styrofoam cup. It's not great. And at 11 Hoyt, we had custom branded paper coffee cups like you would get at your chic Brooklyn third wave coffee house down the road. And I think those connections really matter to people because what they do, in addition to making people feel like the brand is thorough, it says this developer has thought of everything. It's easy to look at numbers on a page, prices. We all get lost in the numbers and the price per square foot. But at the end of the day, for a lot of people, the purchase they're about to make is going to be the biggest purchase that they ever make in their lives. And the emotional aspect of that is that they want to feel really confident in that decision. So when the pen says the property name on it and the coffee cup says the property name on it, or if it's just a beautiful cup that feels like the building in ways that they can't articulate, they may not even clock it. But when they walk out the door, they're thinking, man, they thought of everything. And I know that this building, when it's done, is going to meet all of my expectations, if not blow them out of the water.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even if they don't recognize it, they will remember the bad cup.
Absolutely. They will. And they may not even know that they remember it. And that's the weird thing. But that's why you have to anticipate all of their needs. And I will say our salespeople also, our traditional model is that our sales teams are dedicated to just one project. So the team that sells 35 Hudson Yards is sitting at 35 Hudson Yards all day, every day. They're selling that building and they know it inside and out. So when the buyer says, how many pipes is the heating system? Is it 2-pipe or 4-pipe? They know the answer. But also when the buyer says, wow, that granite on the bathroom countertop is beautiful, or that marble, they can say, oh, it comes from this quarry in this town in Italy, and here's what makes it special. And so that depth of knowledge really makes the buyers feel like they're being taken care of and gives them a lot of comfort, I think.
Sure. I love that your example touched on the experiential marketing piece that comes into a senior comms role in the luxury development space, because you need to do more than just pump out press releases. And that's what it
Absolutely.
takes at the highest levels.
Yeah. And it really does need to be a cohesive process that the developer and all of the ancillary, the construction teams are all in on. Once we move into a building, when we have, for instance, like a finished unit in an unfinished building, we are almost always asking the developer to complete an entry sequence that feels complete. You could walk into the building that's 30% done, but think it's done because you walk into a finished lobby or a mostly finished lobby. Excuse me, you take a mostly finished elevator to a finished corridor and walk into a finished apartment. It's a very different experience than walking into a very active construction site, even if you have a construction helmet on, which sometimes we do. But I was taking buyers into a building once where the developer did not share this ethos, which made it challenging. And there was literally a rat flopping around in a trap. And you may as well just walk the people right back out the door at that point, because at that point it's the rat building and then there's nothing else you can do. Yes, and it is cohesive. And again, the earlier you can start thinking about this stuff, the more you can weave it into the product itself. And that's where it really takes it to the next level.
These are great stories. Very New York with the rat.
Very New York. Yeah, the rat.
So you've worked across developers, architects, design teams, sales teams, marketing groups. We just talked about a lot of it. Where does communications actually create the most value when all of those stakeholders want different things?
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, those stakeholders don't really want different things. I'm tempted, at the risk of sounding like I'm pandering to you, I just want to say yes. Like, communications is the most important thing. And if your developer and your sales teams want to sell their building, all developers have their own metrics for how quickly they need to sell and whether price or velocity or absorption is most important to them. But they're focused on the project being successful, having a good reputation, building a solid building. The sales teams are equally invested in that. The marketing teams want it to be a success. I don't know that the missions of those groups are that different. And if they are, I think it's incumbent upon all the parties to get themselves aligned so that there can be one narrative that works for the construction team and the developer and the architects. But the end of the day, all of those things, all of those groups' priorities can be part of a cohesive marketing story. We do our own press, and most of our projects work with independent agencies that are hired by the developers, but we have architects that have their own marketing and PR teams. We have construction companies that have their own PR teams. We may have a landscape designer that has their own PR team. So it's really about mining all of that potential for press. And I keep talking about 11 Hoyt because that was a project that I was especially close to, but that was an amazing landscape designer. And we did an event where they talked about what it takes to build a park and plant trees on an elevated platform. And like, you never think about how
Hmm.
much does a tree weigh? But when you ask that question in a group of people, it gets their attention. And that story complements the innovativeness of the development. And then that complements the marketing story. And then it's amplifying all of those things. So if it's just interior design press, landscape design press, architecture press, or even construction trade press, if there's something innovative about, say, the HVAC systems or the elevators, we put them all on social media because it's about blowing up everything and making sure everyone knows how amazing all of our projects are.
Wow. I don't want to just jump to another subject, but
Go for it.
we're going to talk a little bit about public affairs, but
Mhm.
more about just market fluency and getting up to speed from a comm standpoint. So you had told me once in the past that you were thrown into the Chelsea market entitlements process and realizing you were the least informed person in the room. What did
That's a
that
generous way
teach?
of putting it. Yeah. Very much the least informed person in the room.
What did that teach you about learning quickly in this industry? And how do you think communicators should approach the parts of this world they don't know yet?
So I was working for Jamestown, who owned Chelsea Market at the time. I was running marketing for some assets up and down the Eastern Seaboard and running our PR. And my boss walked into my office one day and said, "You're now running the Chelsea Market rezoning. I know you don't know anything about this, but you can figure it out. And there's a call in an hour." So I hopped on this call, and it was this incredible assortment of zoning attorneys and public affairs firms, consumer PR firms, real estate PR firms, lobbying groups. And I was furiously trying to take notes without knowing what any of them were talking about. It was a little bit humiliating, but I panicked for an hour or so. And then there were two fellows on the team that I had that were like a little closer to my age, seemed a little bit more accessible than the $2,000 an hour zoning attorney. And I knew that they were friendly. So I emailed the two of them and asked them if I could take them out to lunch. And I said to them, "You're either going to respect me less or more after I say this, but I want to be really honest that I don't know that much about what I'm doing, but I'm committed to this project being a success. And I can only do that if I know what's going on. So can you speak to me like I'm a 5-year-old and walk me through this process and walk me through how I can best empower you to get to the result that we all want?" And they said, "Oh, wow, we respect you so much more." And it was the start of a great relationship. And ultimately a successful rezoning that unlocked almost $300 million worth of value for that project. But it really took humility. And I think humility is
Yeah.
something that is sorely lacking in probably every industry. But it's hard when you're under pressure and there's a lot of money flying around and a lot of swords of Damocles hanging over you all the time, ready to fall, to step up and say, "I don't know what I'm talking about."
Yeah.
But I think that there's so much power in knowing what you don't know. And I also think it's extremely easy to pinpoint the people that are just talking about things that they don't necessarily understand. And so I committed to not being one of those people. And I would encourage everyone to not be one of those people. And I think also in today's media environment with social media as it is and how much access there is to information, there's so much more scrutiny than there was when everybody got their news from the same three newspapers. So it's really dangerous to be out there flailing around if you don't know what you're doing. When I think about how this applies to comms, think really carefully about every audience that might be out there because every audience is out there and they're probably listening, whether you realize it or not. So when we have a property that has a public affairs component, we have a project called Claremont Hall that we work on, developed by Lendlease. It's a fantastic project, really beautiful, Robert A.M. Stern design. It is on the campus of the Union Theological Seminary. And it's amazing. So there was an air rights transfer to the developer, the finances of which allowed the seminary to address some maintenance issues that had been plaguing them for a long time. And it really locked in the ability of that institution to continue to operate. But at the same time, you're building a tower in a historic setting. That's almost always going to raise eyebrows. There was a public housing component where the developer was contributing to a fund that would create opportunities in housing in other parts of the city. These things tend to also draw controversy. So I keep going back to the same messages, but really thinking carefully about what you don't know. And then also thinking about it as early as you can, because God, if you can avoid getting caught off guard, that's 90% of the battle. So it's less what are we going to do if this happens and what are we going to do when this happens, if that makes sense.
No, that's it does make sense, and it's clear that faking it till you make it is not always the right thing to do. And I think that this is really helpful for a lot of younger PR and comms folks that are maybe didn't have an architecture background like yourself. A lot of the people that I know in this industry and on the comms and PR side fell into this work and had to
Mhm.
learn it on the fly, really. And I think it is really powerful to own that you don't know something, to learn it, to get that market fluency, and you'll get that respect in the bigger rooms as time goes on.
There's so much information out there. If you don't understand the capital stack behind real estate development, there are 50 YouTube videos and you can spend an hour or two watching it. You don't need the formal MBA to learn that kernel of information that's going to help you understand what's going on in the room. And also surround yourself with people that are going to be supportive. I always tell people that work for me that they should never be embarrassed about not knowing something. I think I've been lucky enough to work for a lot of employers who believe in pulling people from diverse backgrounds and believing that enriches the environment and not expecting everyone to have the same degrees and the same knowledge base. And I don't expect everyone that comes in here to know everything about what we do. It's a specific industry, especially our corner of it. So I always tell people, I would love it if you came up to me after a meeting and said, we talked about Schedule A's 5 times in that meeting. What is a Schedule A? It takes 2 minutes to do that. It's a connection between you and someone that works for you, and you're raising the water level that raises all boats if you enrich your team. And so I think it's fostering a dialogue like that between senior people, junior people is really essential.
Yeah. And one thing that you touched on that I think is so important, and it's the availability of information now. And this could be a whole other conversation. And this is where I think AI really does add value to a comms professional. If I don't know something, I can create myself a fluency guide within Claude or whatever LLM that you use
Yeah.
in minutes. And I can give myself a vocabulary test over the weekend and spend an hour in the morning going through a 10-page PDF so I learn the terminology and I don't have to pay anybody to learn that. I don't have to go through the
Yeah.
library. I can just say, this is the subject matter that I need to learn. Create me a fluency guide that I can peruse over coffee on a Saturday morning. And I'm learning, and it's beautiful.
When the city passed the City of Yes program, I believe it was the year before, yeah, before last, it was a kind of fundamental rethinking of the city's residential zoning policies and has huge implications, but it's policy, it's huge and in depth and deep and complex. And I asked an LLM, an advanced version of an LLM, to create a guide for me that would help me and my team to understand it. And I outlined to the LLM what part of the industry we sit in, who our clients are, who our buyers are. And I asked it to come up with the pros and the cons. And it took about 2 hours and it generated a 25-page document that's like a Bible for it now. So yeah, there's a ton of power there. And also, please don't use it to write copy. That's, I mean, to everyone who's listening, please. It's so clear and it's so
Yeah, yeah. AI slap is a whole other conversation as
oof.
well. So I want to bring this conversation full circle now to where I sit. I'm recruiting in this space, and the communications role inside the built environment keeps expanding beyond traditional PR. And we already talked about experiential marketing and public affairs in this conversation. What skills or ways of thinking do you think are becoming more important now?
Yeah, I think first of all, storytelling, especially in the age of AI slop, is essential. It's the story behind our individual development, but it's also the story behind us as a company. And I ended up in this role because I saw some opportunities in the way that the company was talking about itself. And I made a Hail Mary pass to our leadership and said, I think we could work on this. And they said, great, you're in charge of it now. And so that's what brings me to where I am now. But it took really broadly, thinking really broadly across every aspect of what we do. I think it's very easy for organizations to get siloed, every organization, where you have disciplines that are doing things that on paper seem very different. But when you can unearth those threads that connect them, I think that's where a lot of the power lies. So it's that sort of cross institutional thinking. And it goes back to stuff we've talked about earlier, but how does the design aspect of this building relate to the sales aspect? How does the data aspect relate to the pricing? Is that part of the story? We've gotten press about, and again, going back to 11 Hoyt, but it was a moment in the market where it was one of the last new developments in New York City that had entry level units under $1 million. And we got a New York Times story out of it. And all it was paying attention in a conversation and thinking about it critically in terms of what might be interesting to the audiences out there. So I always tell people that just listen in every meeting, whether you think it applies to you or not, because I think that's where a lot of the innovative storytelling is going to continue to come from.
Mm.
And then again, ask those questions. If you don't know, ask the questions, find out the answers, and maybe there's opportunity there that you haven't really thought about. And again, just being careful. It's a dangerous, slippery world out there in social media, and be always thinking, not to sound like the nervous fellow that I probably am, but what might be the drawback of the initiative that you're planning or the messaging that you're putting out? Think really carefully about that, because I think anyone that works in comms has been through moments where you realize that the thing you thought was going to be great maybe it wasn't worth it at the end of the day. Unfortunately, we're in a world in crisis, and so we have to think in terms of crisis. Think broadly, befriend your colleagues, pay attention when you think the meeting doesn't apply to you, and ask questions.
I agree, but I think that just shows that comms is more valuable than it's ever been.
And, if you're working with a client, if you're at an agency or you're working in-house, I think it's easy, you probably have seen this as well, that it's easy for comms people to be the lowest rung on the ladder when it comes to information funneling out after the building's designed, after the architect's been selected, after maybe even after the marketing pieces are done. But that puts the whole organization at such a disadvantage, specifically the comms people trying to tell a story about something that you haven't had an opportunity to create. Is it not a great position to be in when the opportunities are so rich, when the collaboration starts a little bit earlier?
Andrew, this has been really valuable. I
Thank
think this
you.
is going to be incredibly useful for the communications professionals in my network who are working in this space every day. And I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. And if anyone in your network that's listening wants to reach out and say hi, always around for a chat. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrew.